Before we step into the strength and depth of the female gaze, we need to understand what it pushes against. Coined by feminist theorist Laura Mulvey in her 1975 essay, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema. The male gaze refers to how mainstream cinema, largely controlled by male creators, positions women as passive objects of desire for a heterosexual male viewer. Women become images to be looked at rather than agents of their own desire. This gaze doesn't just flatten women, it restricts men too. It promotes a hyper-masculine ideal that equates strength with emotional repression, power with dominance, and vulnerability with weakness. It teaches men to be oppressive in their femininity, as Bell Hooks writes in The Will to Change, quote, "Patriarchy has no gender," end quote, meaning both men and women internalize these harmful ideas. The male gaze is one way that patriarchy is kept alive in the cultural bloodstream. Technically, this plays out in the framing, the lingering close-ups on a woman's legs before her face, or the over-the-shoulder shots that deny her point of view. Films shot this way deny subjectivity. Women become looked at, not looking. This dynamic shapes our desires, our body image, and even our expectations on love. By highlighting these structures, the female gaze doesn't just reimagine women, it offers liberation to men too. It makes space for feeling, for witnessing, for being seen without being stripped of our agency. Even female filmmakers can unintentionally fall into the trap of the male gaze, especially when working within systems shaped by patriarchal norms. The pressure to conform to industry expectations, aesthetic standards, or audience desires can lead to reproducing the very gaze they might seek to challenge. We'll be exploring 7 films, both directed by men and women, that explore the female gaze and their complexity of portraying women and young girls. Chapter 1, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, directed by Celine Sciamma.
Well, the first desire was to write a love story, a film dedicated to love, centered around a love story, a patient look at how a love desire is born, how it grows, how it flourishes, but also the memory of a love story and what is left.
Celine Sciamma, a French filmmaker celebrated for her delicate, richly observational portraits of identity and becoming, crafts in The Portrait of a Lady on Fire an anti-spectacle, a restrained, almost devotional romance centered on the act of looking. Set in 19th century France, the film follows Marianne, a painter commissioned to secretly paint Eloise, a young woman resisting her arranged marriage. As their emotional connection deepens, the lines between subject and observer dissolve, giving rise to the gaze born of mutual recognition. Sciamma actively rejects the male gaze by removing male characters from the narrative, allowing the camera to explore women's subjectivity without interruption or intrusion. Cinematographer Claire Mathon bathes the film in natural light, often using candlelight and long takes to let emotions unfold without manipulation. Theoretically, grounding comes from Laura Mulvey's essay Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, which describes how traditional cinema positions women as passive objects for male pleasure. Sciamma's camera resists this. Rather than voyeuristic close-ups, it lingers on gestures, fingers brushing, eyes meeting. This quote-unquote ethical gaze, as feminist scroller Kaji Silverman describes in The Threshold of the Visible World, is not about consumption but witnessing. The female gaze here is a gaze of care, co-presence, and slow-burning intimacy. Psychologically, the film is structured around memory, desire as remembered rather than possessed. Sciamma has said in an interview with Film Comment, quote, "It's a film about creation. It's about what it means to look and to be looked at. And that's also what falling in love is about," end quote. Love is not just enacted, it's archived, captured in the memory of a glance, a pause, a breath. It's about longing for not someone, but for a moment, forever burned into one's interior life. The Orpheus myth, which recurs throughout the film, becomes a metaphor for forbidden love and the painful necessity of letting go. When Marianne turns back for the final look, it is not to claim Eloise, but to remember her. It's a gaze not of ownership, but of an eternal return. This is how cinema reclaims female desire, not through performance or spectacle, but through the charged stillness of emotional truth. It is a film about love. Chapter 2, The Piano, directed and written by Jane Chapman. Jane Chapman, the first female director to win the Palme d'Or and only the second to win an Academy Award for Best Director, is a towering figure in feminist cinema. With The Piano, she crafted a film that refuses to romanticize female silence or sexual politics. Instead, it invites us into a world where voice, body, and desire are deeply entangled and dangerously suppressed. Set in colonial New Zealand in the mid-19th century, the story follows Ada McGrath, a mute Scottish pianist sent overseas for an arranged marriage. Her piano is her voice, her lover, her defiance. As feminist film theorist Teresa de Laurentiis suggests in Alice Doesn't, Feminism, Semiotics, Cinema, silence in women can be both a symptom of patriarchal repression and a strategy of resistance. Ida's muteness is not passivity, it is a protest. Chapman uses extreme close-ups, mud-covered hands, the ivory keys, a torn dress to emphasize bodily memory and trauma. Cinematographer Stuart Dryburgh captures the New Zealand coast in a palette of greys and greens, invoking a moody, gothic sensuality. Chapman avoids the male gaze by never fetishizing Ida. Her eroticism is interior. When Ida and George negotiate access to the piano through acts of intimacy, the camera does not objectify, it observes. Ida is equal in her nakedness to George. One is never clothed while the other is nude. Chapman said, quote, "The fact that Ida doesn't speak, her stubbornness, her interiority, her strength, her point of view, and the piano speaking for her, speaks about not giving a voice in the world. That does not say you don't have an opinion," end quote. Psychologically, the film interrogates the relationship between agency and voicelessness. Drawing from Lacanian psychoanalysis, the piano becomes a phallic object Ida both possesses and is possessed by. It is her access to power, her refusal to assimilate. She communicates through the music, her body, and eventually a single devastating act of autonomy. Chapman's female gaze is not a sentimental, it's visceral, dark, and seeped in contradiction. In The Piano, love is not redemptive, it is negotiation. Sex is not always liberation, it is entitlement. But Chapman gives Ida a gift, a future of her choosing, a voice not returned but reborn. The female gaze here doesn't just reveal, it raptures. Chapter 3, Daughters of the Dust, directed by Julia Dash. The first feature film directed by an African-American woman to receive a general theatrical release in the United States, Julia Dash's Daughters of the Dust is a cinematic poem, a haunting, immersive tapestry of black womanhood. Set in 1902, it follows the Pizat family, Gula Islanders descended from the enslaved West Africans, as they prepare to immigrate to the Sea Islands of South Carolina. What Dash accomplishes is nothing sort of miraculous. She creates a gaze that is not just female, but ancestral, one that resists Western narrative logic and invites us into the rhythm of a matriarchal worldview. Shot by Arthur Jaffa, the film uses painterly compositions, symbolic color palettes, and natural light to invoke a spiritual connection to land and lineage. There is no central protagonist. Instead, the film flows like memory itself, circular, non-linear, intuitive. The narration comes from an unborn child, a ghostly voice from the future. In doing so, Dash dismantles the colonial timeline and affirms the generational wisdom of black women. As scholar Bell Hooks writes, quotes, "This is not a gaze to be possessed or consumed, it is a gaze that reclaims." End quote. The women in Daughters of the Dust are not framed for pleasure, but for power, as generations of language, culture, and identity. Nana Pizatz, the family matriarch, becomes a vessel of spiritual resistance, urging her descendants to remember who they are.
I was very much excited by the opportunity to depict African-American women or women from the African diaspora in a way that was different from what I was seeing on television at the time. or what I was seeing in the movies with the blaxploitation films.
This is exactly what she achieves. Each woman is portrayed as complex and self-ruling, shaped by her relationship with history, faith, and land. From a psychological lens, the film engages with cultural trauma and post-memory, echoing theorist Marianne Hirsch's ideas on how trauma is inherited across generations. The camera lingers on hair, water, skin, and cloth, sensory markers of tradition. These textures carry more narrative weight than dialogue, aligning with African diasporic storytelling traditions that center symbolism over linear plot. Julia Dash gives us a rare, uncompromised black feminist gaze, one that reclaims beauty from the margins and centers it within a collective, embodied resistance. It is not a film that asks to be watched, it's a film that asks to be remembered. Chapter 4, Whisper of the Heart, directed by Yoshifumi Kondo, and written by Hayao Miyazaki. I was contemplating whether I should explore all of Studio Ghibli's body of work, since so many of them effectively capture the female gaze, but I settled for my favorite film, The Whisper of the Heart. This film is a quiet, luminous love letter to girlhood, creativity, and emotional interiority, all of which pours with the essence of the female gaze. Directed by Yoshifumi Kondo and written by Hayao Miyazaki, Yoshifumi worked at Studio Ghibli as an animator and storyboard artist, where his influence and creativity can be seen in many Studio Ghibli films. This Studio Ghibli film centers on a curious teenage girl and an inspiring writer navigating first love, self-doubt, and the ache of growing up. Unlike the traditional male gaze that objectifies young women or filters their stories through desire, Whispers of the Heart treats Shizuki's world as sacred. The camera lingers not on her body, but on her experiences. The way she lights up in a library, stares out a train window, or gets lost in writing a story. These aren't moments of spectacle, but of being. As feminist scroller Carl Clover suggests in Men, Women, and Chainsaws, quote, "The gaze is not inherently male, it's about power," end quote. In this film, that power is handed back to Shizuki. The animation style reflects this intimately. Studio Ghibli's hallmark of soft, detailed backgrounds, natural lighting, and emotive expressions create a gaze that feels less like surveillance and more like witnessing. There is no rush. The film's pace mirrors the rhythm of adolescence itself. Dreamy, restless, tender. Psychologically, Shizuki's journey is about individuality, influenced by Carl Jung's shadow self theory. We see her confronting her shadow self, her fear of not being good enough, and emerging with a clearer sense of identity. Her romance with Sanji isn't about possession or salvation, it's about parallel growth. The relationship, like the film, is built on mutual respect and creative yearning. Written by Miyazaki, who has expressed his love for exploring children's emotions as real and worth expressing, that ethos radiates through Whisper of the Heart. It doesn't tell girls who to be, it gives them the space to become. In this way, Ghibli's female gaze, though filtered through male creators, is profoundly empathetic. It's a testament to what happens when men choose to observe rather than dominate, to honor rather than define. Chapter 5, If Beale Street Could Talk, directed by Barry Jenkins.
I'm gonna take this, but I want to take it by thanking all the women involved with the Beale Street Could Talk that made it the film that it was. Adela Romansky, Sarah Murphy, and Dee Dee Gardner, my producers. Joy McMillan, my editor. These wonderful, wonderful castmates, Regina King, Anjanou Ellis, Kiki Lane, Emily Rios, all these women who told me what it had to be. I had to check my directorial ego and learn I cannot make a movie about women without women's voices at the forefront.
Barry Jenkins, an Oscar-winning director for Moonlight, and his critically acclaimed film If Beale Street Could Talk, adapted from James Baldwin's 1974 novel, is a visceral helm to black love, dignity, and injustice, all composed through what could only be described as a tender, radical gaze. He creates a space for a distinctive female and black perspective to emerge on screen, one that challenges the violence of the male gaze with the reverence of a loving one. The film follows Tish and Fonny, a young black couple in 1970s Harlem, navigating the brutal injustice of racist legal systems that wrongly imprisons Fonny. What elevates this film into the realm of the female gaze is its extraordinary commitment to intimacy. Jenkins and cinematographer James Laxton use long, steady close-ups where characters look directly into the camera, not as confrontational moments, but as a quiet affirmation of interior life. It is, as bell hooks might say, a, quote, loving gaze, end quote, that insists on black humanity. Where the male gaze often objectifies, Jenkins's lens observes. The camera lingers on Tish's face as she speaks, on the way she touches Fonny's skin, on the breaths between sentences. These visual choices draw directly from Baldwin's language, which centers love not as escape, but as endurance. The film's use of color, rich golds, deep reds, tender blues, mirrors the emotional palette of memory and desire. Its score, composed by Nicholas Britell, swells not to heighten tension, but to hold grief like a slow exhale. Feminist film scroller Jacqueline Bobo has written about the need for black women to be seen as, quote, self-defying subjects, end quote. Tish's voiceover, lyrical, slow, almost whispered, does exactly that. She narrates her world with calm authority, reclaiming storytelling power that cinema has so often denied women of color. Ultimately, If Bell Street Could Talk doesn't just present a love story, but a sacred act of seeing.
We were a part of each other, flesh of each other's flesh, which we so took for granted that we never thought of the flesh.
Chapter 6, Julieta, directed by Pedro Almodovar. In Julieta, Pedro Almodovar adapts 3 short stories by Alice Munro to create a portrait of maternal loss, guilt, and feminine interiority. What emerges is a film that gazes at women not with desire, but with deep, patient curiosity. Almodovar's camera does not dissect women, it listens to them. And in Julieta, that listening becomes the soul of the narrative. The story follows Julieta, a woman who has lost contact with her daughter and is consumed by grief, memory, and shame. The film is structured like a confession, unfolding through flashbacks that echo the psychological structure of trauma, nonlinear, sensory, and haunted. This narrative shape echoes psychoanalyst Julia Kristoffer's theory of abjection, where maternal loss becomes the foundation of subjectivity. Julieta's identity collapses and reforms around what has been severed. Cinematographically, Almodovar collaborates with cinematographer Jean-Claude Lurie to create a visual world where color speaks when words cannot. Deep reds, ocean blues, and mustard yellows carry emotional meaning, not just aesthetic flourish. The film is full of long, unbroken shots of women thinking, grieving, reading, and waiting. These choices reject the rapid-fire rhythm of male-dominated storytelling and instead embrace the slowness of emotional processing. Importantly, in the film, it never eroticizes its protagonist. Even in scenes of romantic intimacy, the camera remains focused on feeling, not exposure. The female body is not territory to be conquered, but a landscape of memory, motherhood, and mourning. Almodovar's work aligns with feminist scroller Teresa de Laurentiis, who argued for a cinema, quote, about women's experiences, not merely of women's bodies, end quote. While Almodovar is a man, his gaze is respectful, not invasive. He treats his female characters with the same richness, contradiction, and importance, usually reserved for male protagonists. In Julieta, women are not the background noise of someone else's story, they are the story, and that too is the female gaze. Chapter 7, Lost in Translation, directed by Sofia Coppola. Sofia Coppola's Lost in Translation is a landmark of the 21st century cinema, a film that defines the female gaze not through overt ideology, but through feeling, fragmentation, and emotional quiet. The story follows Charlotte, a young woman adrift in her marriage, and Bob, an aging actor in Tokyo for a whiskey commercial. Over the course of several days, their brief yet profound connection unfolds, not through drama, but through silence, glances, and unspoken understanding. Coppola, daughter of the legendary Francis Ford Coppola, has carved out her own space in cinema. By centering the interior lives of women in Lost in Translation, She uses shallow depth of field, hushed ambient sound, and prolonged takes to build emotional atmosphere rather than narrative tension. As feminist film scholar Laura Melvey pointed out, quote, "The gaze demonstrates not only what we see, but how we are positioned in relations to it." End quote. Coppola's camera rarely sexualizes Charlotte. Instead, it watches her think. It captures her isolation, her stillness, her unspoken ache. Psychologically, the film delves into existential alienation, a theme found in Jean-Paul Sartre, a prominent French philosopher, and echoed by Jean Baudrillard's theory of the hyperreal. Tokyo itself becomes a dreamscape, dazzling yet impersonal, real yet unreal. Charlotte and Bob find intimacy not through physical consummation, but shared dislocation. As Coppola explains, quote, "It's about misunderstandings between people and places. It's about things being disconnected and looking for moments of connection," end quote. The female gaze here is not about ownership or climax, it's about attention. Coppola lingers in moments of emotional ambiguity. A glance across a crowded bar, a whispered farewell. These moments, often dismissed in male-driven narratives as nothing, become everything. They are the heartbeats of the story. Critically, Lost in Translation also invites questions about cultural voyeurism. While some critiques point out the Orientalist lens through which Japan is presented, Coppola defends this portrayal as reflective of the character's alienation, not the culture itself. Even so, it reminds us that the female gaze must also navigate privilege, authorship, and positionality. In the end, what makes Lost in Translation a pillar of the feminist gaze is not its answers, but its questions, its willingness to dwell in the undefined, the unsaid, the unresolved. It's a gaze that listens. These films, spanning continents and identities, share a common thread. They give space to women's subjectivity, whether told by women or empathetic male directors. The female gaze is about ethical storytelling. In a world trained to look at women, these films invite us to see with them instead. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!